Steve Millington joins us in studios on Tuesday mornings between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. And later this month, I think if I get an opportunity, I'm going to be going away for Christmas. Now, that's a Sunday, so there's no radio that day, and likely the holiday's a Monday, which likely means no radio. But then Steve would actually be filling in for a few days while I was out of town. Or the week before I'll be away, and we haven't figured out which days yet. But
So anyway, there's a good chance I may be here for more than just Tuesday mornings from 8:30 to 9.
yeah, better part of a week later in the month. Just a quick note for everybody who's tuning in this morning. We have some new friends here at the radio station who, well, I always joke that every advertiser helps pay the electric bill, which those are high at radio stations for obvious reasons. But the folks at Waddell and Reed, they do know a lot about money, more so than I do. I'll tell you that. They have been in business for 8 decades. One of the oldest firms to offer mutual funds. In fact, they do two. Most firms only are managing one at this point. They also will not gamble your money away in some ridiculous pie in the sky scheme somebody may have. They invest in the tried and true. Obviously, they know what they're doing, having been in business now for most of a century. And they will also work with you. They'll keep it level. They won't give you expectations that you're going to be rich overnight. But they will also help tailor this for your own personal needs because we all have different needs when it comes to our expectations of where we want our money to be when we eventually no longer are working, whether that be through our own choice or perhaps somebody else's choice. And they do take the planning personally. Steve Millington, a big story over the course of the weekend was Jill Stein from the Green Party decided that she was going to challenge the election results in Wisconsin. Even a lot of Democrats are saying she's full of baloney.
That's a bad idea.
A really bad idea. And then all of a sudden, even though Hillary Clinton said she criticized Trump for saying that he would not necessarily honor the results, jumped on board. So what?
Guess who is not honoring the results of the election? It isn't Trump, it's Hillary. Man, oh man, what are these guys thinking?
So are they just trying to? One of the theories was, I read it over the weekend, and then I also heard Rush Limbaugh mention it yesterday. They're just trying to make anything they can to make Trump look like the illegitimate president.
I read an article, I think it was on American Thinker yesterday, that had that same storyline in it. They go through a little bit more an analysis of how this would all work, and they boiled it down to okay, so if it goes to the House and Senate, the results is going to be the same. And so, what are they trying to do? They're trying to cast an ugly dispersion upon Trump's election as president and make him seem as though he is an illegitimate president. Number one, he didn't win the popular vote. Hillary has about a 1.7 million vote lead in the popular vote. Some say it's close to 2 million. But she obviously clearly did not reach the hurdle rate on the electoral college of 270. But if they can begin to destroy some of the things. Trump did not get the popular vote. He didn't get the 270 electoral college votes, and the only reason that he got elected president was he had to rely on the members of his own party in Congress to elect him. And the story that I read said that's bogus in several different approaches. Number one, so we challenge Wisconsin. Now we can't challenge Florida. The deadline has passed for recount challenges in Florida, so their election has been canvassed and certified by the Secretary of State, and that's the end of that. Pennsylvania is still open. Wisconsin is still open. I think Michigan may be open, but
Michigan wasn't at the smallest margin.
yeah, but it's just not likely. So what happens is if they challenge those three states and demand a hand counting of all of the ballots rather than the electronic counting that we're also common to see, is just black in the little mark next to the name and make sure you cover it completely so that it's very legible. And then they have an optical reader that just reads all of those things. Okay, they want to hand count them. Well, that takes forever. So suddenly, Wisconsin does not have a, quote, certified election. So what happens? Well, at that point in time, we just deduct all of Wisconsin's electoral college votes from the total available. So we no longer have 535 electoral college votes available. It is a number less than that. And I think Wisconsin was like 15 or 18. I don't remember that number. Sorry, I just don't remember it. So now we just dropped that number down. So now 270 votes is no longer required. It's a lesser number because we don't have and the same thing would hold true if they challenged the thing in Pennsylvania or in Michigan. It just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
I read today where Pennsylvania law that they likely won't be able to get their challenge. Pennsylvania law will block that from happening.
That I read that same article too, Bill.
We've got to
So,
take a short break,
oh, we
but
do. My, how time flies when you're having fun. Gee whiz.
sure beats working for a living, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sure does.
We've got more on the way with Steve Millington, chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. We're up to 30. Some of those slick roads may start melting shortly. We can only hope.
Let's hope. Coming in this morning from the west end of the county,
yeah.
they were a little bit on the dicey side. So be awake out there.
That's why you need a helicopter flight from Buell. Our studio guest is Steve Millington. He's the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. He joins us between 8:30 and 9 o'clock on Tuesday mornings. I do want to point out tomorrow morning, again, just a quick mention, we have the folks from Chip Family Medicine coming in. And then in hour number 2 of the program, we're going to have a discussion with prosecuting attorney Grant Lobes about marijuana legalization. If you heard our conversations last week, not only with Randy Staples, but with Steve on that issue, it generated a lot of discussion. And I won't keep you in suspense. Grant Lobes does not favor it. I think that we'll make that clear. We don't want to give any impressions here that he does, but he's going to he's scheduled to join us just after 9 o'clock tomorrow morning to talk about that. You whipped up a hornet's nest last week talking about that.
So well, that's okay. Maybe we need to have that what I refer to as the great conversation, and we seem to be the world is closing in around us with this idea that marijuana legalization is the latest greatest deal in the whole world, and man, I just can't hardly see that.
So many things that you would think are going to be priorities in Boise coming up next year that the idea that someone can sit around and smoke a little hash, would become a secondary concern.
Well, let's talk about the legislature for just a minute. The this weekend, I think it's Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. All of the legislators, all 105 of them from both political parties, are going to meet in their respective caucuses. And unfortunately, I'm positive that the location has been published and so forth. I didn't get that. I just know they're meeting Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. 2 or 3 things are going to happen. Number one, we're going to reelect leadership positions. Should be very little question as to whether or not Speaker Bedke is reelected to his position, and the President Pro Tem of the Senate is Brent Hill, I think, from Idaho Falls, and he should be elected easily. So then what do? Well, we establish the committee chairmans for each of the various standing committees that the legislature has. And we have one opening in the Senate. The guy who ran against Robin Brody for the Supreme Court Justice, Kurt McKenzie. He had a very powerful Senate assignment. State Affairs, I think, was the committee that he chaired in the Senate, and that's a pretty powerful committee. You get all kinds of issues that are total statewide in scope, and they come to his committee to be sorted out, and maybe they reassign them to some other committee, or they basically die in his committee. So State Affairs is a pretty powerful committee. And there could be a lot of people who are chairmen of other Senate committees who would like to step into that chair because it is a little bit more visible and a little bit more powerful.
Scott Bedke, I had a conversation with him briefly last spring, early summer, and I can remember him telling me that he was never a big fan of all of these windmills that are up and down the highway length, which when you get to Hagerman area, you start to see them, and they're just clustered on the horizon. All of that beautiful scenery now is marred by that. Will we see? Because I don't think Donald Trump is going to be as friendly to these alternative energies as the
Mr. Obama
Mr.
was.
Obama was. So, and I know a lot of people have said that this has only driven up the cost of power, which is still relatively cheap here. But will we see an opportunity for someone like Scott Bedke to maybe step in finally and say, "All right, let's cut the baloney on this and just go back to some more tried and true strategies."
I don't think that it would be so much Scott Bedke or the state of Idaho stepping in and saying, this is just ridiculous. One of the things that's driving not only uh, wind generation but solar generation is the tax credits available on federal income taxes when you install that kind of alternative energy sources. I, I hope that's the right word, but you know what I mean, I hope.
Right, right.
Uh, Wind power and solar power and so forth. If those tax cuts, those tax credits would disappear or shrink considerably, then all of a sudden we discover that the costs of construction of windmills and solar plants does not return a reasonable return to investors, and they're going to quit building them. So, it's not so much a matter of regulatory issues as it is economic issues. Take away the tax credits, and those things are no longer economical. Now,
Well,
what do we do?
we have a caller joining
Uh
us.
oh, now I'm going to have to defend something.
7360300, the telephone number. And you're on the air on Top Story with Steve Millington and Bill Colley. Go
Good
ahead.
morning.
Yes, well, this administration and in some respects the Bush administration before that really never, the Bush administration didn't really put a hammer down on this environmental insanity, and then the door was opened back up by the Obama administration. But I know this is old news to some people. Some people may not know this, but there's 15 to 20,000 defunct windmills across this nation, and there's no way to fix them because nobody has the money or the wherewithal to do so because they never have paid for themselves in the first place. And it's just continuing to happen. They break down. Machines break down, and nobody cares to fix them. And can you imagine the horizon over there, whether or not you're driving to Pocatello or over there in Hagerman or wherever it is, windmills have broke down and starting to dilapidate. And what the hell is going to happen with this mess? Okay, one more quick point. I'm a contractor across southern Idaho. I was in Pocatello yesterday checking a job, and the contractor was sitting there standing in the wind as we froze our behinds off trying to check this job. And he says you had certain agencies, the EPA, other agencies, OSHA, just sitting on this job site in their white trucks waiting to find fault for anybody to make a mistake so they could find them. Then they just sit there. And he says when the wind blows, they leave or they shut us down too. When it rains, they just go home. Yesterday they weren't there because it was cold and snowy. And he said they only show up when they want to, but the rest of the time they're sitting there like an eagle willing to pounce on a mouse. But they just want to sue the hard-working businesses of this country. And you say, what the hell kind of parasitic son of a are these people? I'm going to hang up.
Where can you get a job like that?
Yeah,
Just sit
we
out
all
there
need a
in the
job like
truck
that
and
one.
watch.
One of the things that President-elect Trump has said over and over is he's going to eliminate these regulatory constraints that seem to just be putting a rope around the neck of American businesses. Last week, I heard him make a statement that, okay, for every new regulation that you propose, you have to eliminate 2 other regulations. Not 1 for 1, 2 for 1. And I thought, it's about time. It's about time.
That's like creating sunset provisions, which
Well,
really all laws should have.
absolutely they should. And it's interesting, the solar thing. I think that'd just die a natural death. I mean, the windmills. Now, I am not sure. Because I am not a enthusiast of solar powered stuff, but I think between Mountain Home and Boise, I can't think of the little burg out there, just before you get to Boise Stage Stop on the freeway. There's a huge, big construction project on the west side of the freeway, and I didn't know what it was, and somebody commented to me they thought it was a solar power installation, and they've just got acres and acres of solar installation right along the edge of the freeway right there. And I thought to myself, well, that's all well and good, but they're not economically viable.
Yeah,
Yeah, they don't pay their own way,
those shovel-ready projects Mr. Obama referred to was
Yeah,
dumping money into all of his buddy's solar projects,
right.
which is why he wasted our taxpayer dollars and the economy never really improved.
Let's go back and talk about the Idaho legislature coming up.
Right.
We've got the reorganization meetings will take place this weekend, and we will have new assignments made. There will be at least one new assignment in the House of Representatives. Rich Wills was chairman of Judiciary and Rules, and obviously he was defeated in the primaries, and so he's no longer there. That is a pretty significant committee within the House, and so there you may see some people who other committee chairmen who would like to move into that position. So we may see one or two committees shuffle. Most of the freshman representatives will fill slots left by other people who disappeared, and so as far as major changes in leadership, I don't think so. We're still going to have Hill in the Senate. We're still going to have Bedke in the House, and so, what are some issues that we could be facing? Well, add the words will be back. They just seem to come back all the time.
Bring the dog and pony show in, try to
Yeah,
play with people's emotions.
that's
And
right. And then we have two other issues that I think are going to take an awful lot of time because they're going to be hot button items. At the current level of tax revenues, we are going to have a budget surplus for the 2016-17 fiscal year. Um, some say it's going to be sizable, some say it's just going to be a nice surplus, but it's a surplus. And every time we reach this point where we have a surplus, then the hue and cry comes from everywhere to cut taxes. You're getting too much revenue, you're taking too much money away from us, you need to cut taxes. So now we get this big fist fight about let's cut taxes. Well, which taxes do you want to cut and by how much? And then it kind of as a companion to that, but not necessarily in lockstep, but at least in the same kind of parade, we have this thing called the Budget Stabilization Bill. And that hit us 2 years ago when we took monies from the surplus that came in. The legislature fixed a budget at, I don't know, $3.5 billion. That's a bad number, but let's just use it. If the revenues came in at 3.7, we got $200 million here of a surplus. So part of that money went into the rainy day fund, which we have been rebuilding after the 2008-9 recession, and the remainder of it went into the Department of Transportation to kind of stabilize the budget. That's a government term. It don't mean a thing.
we never did, though, come up with the figure for fixing roads and bridges that we really needed. Maybe
No,
the
no,
money
no, no,
should
no.
go there.
So that's the big question. That budget stabilization bill is probably going to, it sunsets this year. So they're going to have to renegotiate that thing and say, okay, do we want to take budget revenue or budget surpluses, revenue surpluses over and above the budget and put them into the Department of Transportation and allow that money to be used in the Department of Transportation, roads, bridges, infrastructure, etc. Um, and there's a lot of pressure on that says, "No, I don't know if we want to do that." And some say, well, yeah, I think we better do that. And so I think we're going to see that kind of a little discussion really get hot because as long as we continue to see revenues accumulating at these levels since July to the end of October, um, there's a revenue surplus. And so, cut taxes. No, no, no. Let's take the money and give it to DOT to take care of our infrastructure costs of roads and bridges and so forth. And then the budget stabilization thing took every penny and put it in the state DOT. None of it filtered down into the local highway districts. So the local highway districts didn't see any benefit from this quote budget stabilization thing, but the state did. And a lot of people are saying, wait a minute, that needs to filter down to the local highway districts, and that would be, uh, 3,700. Uh, I call it the Castleford Blick Freeway on 3,700 that goes clear over to Kimberly and around, and other major arterial roads that are primarily county access roads. They're not designated as a state highway or a federal highway. Those organizations still don't have enough money.
I saw somebody criticize on our website, our Facebook page, a couple of weeks ago here at the radio station, because the governor gave an award to the Department of Transportation, and somebody said, "Well, they don't deserve an award because of the problems we had on the highway over by Burley." And I thought, well, the reason you had the problems over by Burley is because we haven't had the money to repair the roads. So if you want the milk trucks to be able to get to the milk plant, you've got to have good roads.
They got to do two things. They've got to go out to the dairy farm and pick the milk up. Then they've got to deliver it to the processing plants to get it processed and handled. And then somebody's got to pick up the finished product or the processed product, whether it's finished or not is questionable, but at the processed goods, and deliver them to another secondary location. And 99% of that stuff is outside of the state of Idaho. So we got to have roads to move this stuff around. We talk about Idaho being a great place for food processing companies. Only if they can get trucks in here and get trucks out of here. And that requires real good infrastructure, roads, bridges, etc. And in conversations the last week, one guy mentioned to me, Steve, one of these days we're going to have to build another bridge across the canyon from Twin Falls to Jerome County. That's a $200 million bill. $200 million bill.
I just want to share with people, too, as well. We've got to go to the break here shortly, but fact of the matter is that's what I see the state's main priority is commerce and keeping it going. So
that's right. And in order to have better commerce, we've got to have real quality infrastructure. That's going to be a major issue in this year's legislative session.
I want to thank Steve Millington for coming by. We'll see him in another week. And as I say, you'll be seeing a lot more of him later in the month.
Yes.
News is coming up next.
Here we go.
9 o'clock.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. Steve Millington is the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. We've got one more hour of top story ahead. It's 30 right now. News next from Fox. Bill Colley with you this morning until 10 o'clock.